On Halloween night, a woman stayed home with her daughter for just a few minutes. While her husband went to the store, when he returned, he was met with a horrible sight, something you wouldn't even see in horror movies. Later, even some police officers had to seek psychological help, as they had never dealt with anything quite like it, and the truth in this dreadful case shocked everyone who was involved. Dorene Berbert was born on November 29, 1952 in California, and grew up in a very large family of 5 children. Dorene was a kind, positive person who always sought to help others. Since her school years, she decided to pursue a career that would allow her to help people. So after college, she moved to San Francisco and started working as a physiotherapist. Dorene also dreamed of creating her own big family, and soon the opportunity presented itself. At the age of 24, she met a man named Michael Venice. He worked at a manufactory near Dorene's clinic, and soon the couple began dating. A few months later, they decided to get married, and in 1976 their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Dorene were happy together, but after the birth of their child, their relationship started to deteriorate. Within a year, they decided to divorce. Their son stayed with his mother, and Michael could regularly visit him. Despite all this, they maintained normal relationship. A year later, Dorene met a man named Charles. They began dating, got married, and decided to move to San Jose, settling in a quiet residential area in 1979. Their daughter Diana was born. Charles, like his wife, dreamed of having a big family. He raised her son and was overjoyed at the arrival of their daughter. However, tragedy struck the family in February 1984. Year-old Paul climbed over the fence around their pool and fell into the water. Dorene, who was at home at the time, noticed it too late. She pulled her son out of the water and called for an ambulance. They took the child to the hospital, and he was connected to a life support machine, but after 10 days the doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect him from the machine. Dorene was devastated and broken. She couldn't stop blaming herself, even though the police investigation showed it wasn't her fault. Nevertheless, the woman continued to live, and her little daughter helped her cope with this tragedy. 4 years after the tragic events, something good finally happened with the family. Dorene and Charles had been trying to have another child for a long time, but unfortunately pregnancy had been interrupted twice. Eventually, Dorene became pregnant again, and this time everything was going well. The couple was expecting the arrival of a boy scheduled to be born in early November, just a few days before Dorene was supposed to go to the hospital. The family decided to participate in Halloween activities. It was the evening of October 31st. All neighbors decorated their homes, handed out candies, and went trick-or-treating with their children in the neighborhood. Diana, who was 4 at the time, really wanted to join in, and her parents couldn't refuse. Despite Dorene being 9 months pregnant, she went trick-or-treating with her daughter, while Charles stayed home handing out candies to other kids. The mother and daughter returned home shortly before 9:00 p.m. Charles informed his wife that they were running out of candies, and he planned to drive to the nearest store to refill their supplies because he didn't want to leave the neighborhood kids without treats. He left the house around 8:50 p.m. and returned approximately 15 minutes later. Approaching the house, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar, which struck him as odd. However, what awaited him inside was a genuine nightmare. Upon entering, he discovered his wife lying in the corridor on the floor, surrounded by a substantial amount of blood. Dorene showed no signs of life, and Charles immediately called 911. Soon, he noticed that in the living room lay the body of their unborn child. The man was in a deep state of shock, unable to believe what he was witnessing. At some point, the thought crossed his mind that Dorene might have had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized it was much worse. Next to the child lay a human hand. Charles immediately understood it belonged to Doreen. Realizing that someone had attacked his family, he began searching for his daughter, fearing that something might have happened to her as well. There was so much blood on the floor that the man even slipped and fell while running through the house. Fortunately, the girl was alive. She was hiding behind the sofa in the living room. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics found a weak pulse in Doreen and rushed her to the hospital. Unfortunately, they couldn't save her, and she passed away in the ambulance. Her child also did not survive. Besides being removed from the woman's womb, the unknown as silent and inflicted numerous blows on the baby. Medical experts examined Doreen's body and concluded that she had been struck numerous times with a long, sharp object resembling a sword or machete. Meanwhile, the police investigated the house, which resembled a scene from a horrific horror movie. Later, several officers sought psychological help, as even they couldn't cope with what they had witnessed. Blood was everywhere on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Investigators examined the entire house, but didn't find the perpetrator or any clues outside the house. Police saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk. They stopped in the middle of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had gotten into a car at that spot. Soon, officers discovered another clue on the lawn in front of the house. There was a wolf mask covered in blood. They speculated that it might belong to the killer. As Charles stated, they never owned such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory, and police tried to talk to Diana. The girl was in complete shock, but she was the sole witness to what happened and potentially could help identify the silent. Diana told them that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Doreen went to answer and saw a man in a wolf mask holding a long blade. He told her, "I'm going to kill you now." After that, the woman screamed at her daughter to run out of the house, and the girl hid behind the sofa. Diana couldn't recall what happened next to the moment when her father found her. She also couldn't help the police identify the attacker, as he was wearing a wolf mask. Initially, investigators considered the victim's husband as a suspect. They found it suspicious how his trip to the store coincided with the arrival of the killer, as Doreen was attacked just minutes after her husband left home. When Charles returned, he stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he might have done this intentionally to have an excuse for the blood on his clothes. However, detectives quickly found several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes clearly didn't match those that left bloody footprints on the street. Secondly, the killer likely got into a car parked on the road in front of the house, but there were no blood traces found in Charles's vehicle, nor a different pair of shoes. Police went to the store Charles visited and spoke to the staff member. He confirmed that Charles did buy candies from him that evening, indicating he didn't have time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store also supported this alibi, so detectives temporarily stopped considering him the prime suspect and asked Charles if he had anyone in mind who might wish harm to his family, and the men immediately pointed to Doreen's ex-husband, Michael. According to Charles, initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife, but everything changed after the death of their son, who drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen, believing she deliberately killed the boy to cut all connections with him. He even filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking to hold her responsible for the child's death, but lost the case. Even during the time when Michael and Doreen were still married, he occasionally behaved quite strangely. After the birth of their son, he often fell into depression, distancing himself from both his wife and child. Doreen believed all of this somehow connected to his childhood traumas. Michael had hearing problems from an early age, requiring him to constantly wear a bulky hearing aid in those days. It was a rather large device, and because of it, other children constantly teased Michael. All of this led to the man growing up introverted, practically having no friends and avoiding interaction with women. Despite seemingly leaving these issues behind after meeting Doreen, Michael couldn't shake off his old problems completely. This became one of the main reasons for the couple's decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began harboring resentment and animosity towards her. especially disliking the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings intensified after Paul's death, and he started genuinely hating his ex-wife. Michael also lost his job, where he had spent most of his adult life. This factor also had some negative effect on him. After hearing all of this, the detectives decided to go to the man's house and talk to him. Charles' account was clearly insufficient to make Michael the prime suspect, but since he lived only 2 miles from Dorene's house, they decided to pay him a visit right away. Officers arrived at his home around midnight and saw the pickup truck parked near the garage. They shined a flashlight inside and saw something resembling blood on the steering wheel and keys. Afterward, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The lights were on, and officers could hear water running inside the house, leading them to suspect that the man might be disposing of evidence or cleaning blood-stained clothes, so they continued knocking. Michael eventually opened the door. He remained calm even after being informed about his ex-wife's murder. The man answered all their questions nonchalantly and allowed the officers inside without a warrant. According to him, he went to the store during the day, returned home, and hadn't left since. Michael even agreed to sign voluntary consent papers to allow a search of his house as he reached for the pen to sign. Investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael claimed he accidentally cut himself earlier while carving a pumpkin for Halloween. However, the police doubted his words. The wound was visibly fresh and blood was still oozing from it. Meanwhile, a few officers started searching his house. Michael went upstairs with one of them, since they asked him to show his ID. When they entered his bedroom, Michael reached for the bed headboard, but the officer immediately told him to step aside. His actions seemed suspicious. Why would he keep his documents behind the bed? When the officer approached, he saw a holster hanging on the bed headboard with a loaded gun inside. He took the weapon and led Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, his colleagues discovered blood droplets on the floor, leading them to a washing machine in the garage and a pile of clothes with blood stains. This was sufficient for an arrest, and they took the man into custody. Afterward, detectives, along with forensic experts, scrutinized the house more thoroughly, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. The analysis of the blood would take a few days, and meanwhile the police found some new, gruesome discoveries. At first, they uncovered an empty box from Mashit with an 18-inch blade. Medical experts confirmed that this model perfectly matched the wounds on Dorene's body. Secondly, Michael had 2 makeshift coffins in his house, leading detectives to suspect they were intended for Dorene and her husband. Additionally, the police found body bags typically used by medical staff. Considering Michael had no association with these items, it raised significant concerns. Putting all these pieces together, the police went to the judge to request a warrant for the suspect's arrest for an extended period. Without it, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge deemed the evidence too circumstantial. As a result, Michael had to be released, and the man walked free. Nevertheless, 3 days later, the detectives got the answer from the lab experts. Found 2 types of blood at the crime scene, belonging to different individuals. Blood type analysis revealed that the majority of it shared the same blood type as Dorene, with a small amount matching Michael's. Apparently, the man injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. This time, the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was officially charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. Soon, detectives found another piece of evidence linking him to the crime. Speaking with Michael's acquaintances, they learned he owned the exact same wolf mask found near Dorene's house on the previous Halloween. He wore it to a party, and police even discovered a photo of Michael wearing the mask. To eliminate any doubts, they found in his home the exact clothing he wore in that photo. But the story of the mask didn't end there. To further strengthen the case, police interviewed all of Dorene's neighbors about that evening. It turned out that children going door to door for candy saw an adult man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from the victim's house, staring at it. Notably, They spotted him around 700 p.m. 2 hours before
Murder.
Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after the murder. Initially, he pleaded guilty, but later changed his plea. He didn't deny committing the murder, but claimed innocence due to mental health issues. A psychologist assigned to him concluded that he indeed had serious mental problems. Michael told him that he snapped because of Halloween. Witnessing other kids joyfully trick-or-treating reminded him of Paul's death, triggering his breakdown. According to Michael, he went to Dorene's house with a machete on that evening. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and added that he intended to murder her. She immediately recognized the man behind the mask, screamed for her daughter to run, and in the next second, Michael attacked her. He insisted that he was unaware of Dorene's pregnancy, a claim that seemed hard to believe. Standing at just 41 feet tall, all her friends insisted it was impossible not to notice her pregnancy. Before the tragedy, they even joked that because of her belly, Doreen had become broader than taller. The prosecution argued that the man was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance. During the investigation, detectives discovered he had told friends about his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband, then dispose of their bodies in the bay. Given that they found 2 coffins and body bags in his home, the prosecution suggested he intended to carry out this plan, but changed his mind. For some reason, perhaps he panicked or feared staying in the house too long, thinking he might get caught. Dorene's daughter Diana also testified at the trial. At that time, she was 9 years old, and still vividly remembered what happened. Charles didn't want his daughter to go through such a traumatic experience, but she was the only witness. The trial spanned a year, and in the end, the man was found guilty of murdering Dorene and her child. Michael was sentenced to death, but while he awaited execution, California imposed a moratorium on the death penalty. As a result, Michael remains behind bars to this day, and his sentence is unlikely to be carried out anytime soon. Many years later, Diana revealed that this murder haunted her throughout her life, never allowing her to forget that horror for a moment. Eventually, she decided to forgive Michael and tried to leave it all in the past, fearing she might lose her sanity. Otherwise, all right guys, thank you for watching.